Hello, everybody, and welcome and happy Transgender Day of Visibility. This incredible day of awareness is celebrated around the world. Today is dedicated to celebrating the accomplishments of transgender and gender nonconforming people while raising awareness of the work that still needs to be done to achieve trans justice. And boy, do we have a lot of work to do, especially here in Tennessee. I am so happy and proud to bring in two incredible people into this conversation, two trans voices that we are going to uplift and get out there. We don't hear enough from transgender individuals in this conversation about transgender issues, and we're going to fix that today on Transgender Day of Visibility. I've got two friends joining me. I've got Olivia Hill with Vanderbilt University. Olivia is a board member of the Nashville LGBT Chamber. She serves on our board guiding our mission and just as an incredible advocate for the trans community, for the LGBT community. And then we've got Jace Wilder, who is one of the most incredible people I know. Jace was my intern, the Chamber's intern last year during session. I met Jace at Belmont University, where he is a student, and I was speaking to a class, and Jace was in the front row asking me some great questions. We went to lunch afterwards and kept that discussion going, and I said, if you want to get involved in politics and do this, I'd love to have you as an intern. He was invaluable last year, helping us push back on discriminatory legislation, and I miss him greatly this year. He couldn't be my intern because he was somebody else's intern, and I miss you, Jace. So let's start off. I would love to have both of you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself. Olivia, let's start with you.
Okay. My name is Olivia Hill. It's kind of funny you say that, Joe, because that's how you and I met at Vanderbilt at the HERC symposium. And I was like, I don't know who that guy is, but he sounds really cool, and I want to learn more about this. And so I got to talk in, and anyway, so kind of neat.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really know where to start other than kind of go back to the beginning. It was kind of, I started as me, and then there was a great big long pause, and then here I am. So I really thought I was me growing up. It was just my mother and I. My dad left when I was a year and a half old. And so we lived with my mother. I lived with my mother and my grandmother and my female cousin. And so I was just around women. I didn't think that I was any different than anybody in the household. I liked all the same things, and we got along, and we had a lot of the same conversations, and I didn't feel really any different. And as time started to progress, I wanted to start wearing girls' clothes out of the house and play with makeup outside of the house instead of just inside. And that's when I kind of got the talk, and Mom sat me down and told me that I couldn't do those things. And I was a boy and I had to be a boy. And so that's when she signed me up for a psychiatrist in Green Hills to start teaching me how to be a boy. And wanting to be a girl was bad, and I shouldn't want or like dresses or an easy bake oven and cooking, washing dishes, shopping. I should want trucks and cars and all kind of things. At the same time, Mom did her best in 1975 and signed me up for baseball, basketball, football, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and every other way she could possibly try to man me up some. It's also the same time that my dad kind of sporadically came back in the picture, and I only know now that she probably called him and said, "Hey, I really need some help." So as I continued on and got into high school, I was very feminine, and I tried to kind of watch a lot of movies, and I tried to portray myself from Burt Reynolds after Smoking Abandoned and a bunch of other men. I was trying to be this cool, kind of cocky guy, and because that's what I thought I was supposed to be. Because until you're about 8 or 10, anything the parents tell you is true. I mean, there's just no way we would disbelieve a parent at that age. But once we get to around 8 or 10, we start to kind of question that a little bit. but we believe a doctor. And so when a doctor standing there in a white coat told me at age 10 that I couldn't do those things, and I thought that there was something wrong with me because they didn't go away. I just had to hide them. Mm-hmm. So as time went on through high school, I tried to date, didn't do a really good job. A couple of the women that I've actually kind of connected with later on in life that said they broke up with me, they said I was just too feminine. And back then they just assumed I was gay because I pressed all my clothes and I was always dressed nice and I, spoke different and everything. And then when I finally turned 20, I really had enough. I had been pretending long enough. I was really into drugs and trying everything I could do to hide all of this and kind of suppress it all the best I could. And I decided, you know what? I could go to service and they can man me up because this is what I'm supposed to be. I feel like a girl. I want to be like a girl. I am a girl, but everything and everybody tells me I'm a boy. And so the Navy can fix me. And so I was really into drugs a lot. I went down and signed up to the Navy and did all my stuff. And they said, well, you don't have a problem passing a urinalysis, do you? And I'm like, I never heard that word before. I didn't know what that was. And I was like, what is that? And so then he explained it to me. He said, they can test you for drugs for up to 30 days. And I said, well, I should come back in 30 days. Like, why? I was like, well, I was partaking right outside the door before I came in. And so he crumbled up all my paperwork and threw it in the trash. And it's like, if you can clean yourself up, then come on back. And that was the very last time I touched anything illegal because I really wanted in the service that bad. I wanted out of Nashville. I wanted to learn how to be me. Boot camp was really hard. I was beat up quite a bit in boot camp. Had my nose broke. I'm pretty sure I cracked a few ribs. My mouth was busted. A lot of bruising. The Navy used to have a thing called a blanket party. And it's when you were asleep, they would come and throw a blanket over you and people would get on either side and hold you down so that you can't move. And then everybody in your company, usually boot camp's around 85 to 90 people. And so every single person would take a chance of hitting you. And the very last time I was pretty bloody and my nose was for sure broke that time. And I had run into the shower to hide because I didn't know where else to go. And I remember the company commander came in that morning and looked at me and said, what's wrong with you? And I didn't want to get anybody else in trouble. I didn't want to rat anybody out. I just wanted to make it through boot camp and get out. And so I looked at him and I said, I slipped and fell down the stairs. And he just looked at me and says, well, I suggest you be a little bit more careful since we live on the first floor. And that was my understanding that he knew exactly what happened. He'd already talked to everybody. And I knew at that moment that I had to man myself up. And so that's when I took every bit of me and I hid it inside. And that's when I practiced and developed this voice so that I could try to be as manly and as cool as I could possibly be. Those of you that have seen pictures of me after I got out of the service, I had a big long beard all the way down to here. One of my best friends, Abby Rubenfeld, says I look like Duck Dynasty. And so,
I'm sorry. Were you harassed? Were you attacked because of? Was that just something that was common? They were doing that to everybody.
No, it's because I was so
targeted.
Yeah, I was just feminine. So just the way it's just the way I talk, the way I act, the way I moved around. I'm sure probably the way I slept or sat or whatever. I mean, I just came across very feminine. Understand now why that was, but so yeah. I really tried to just man myself up and pretend. I knew at that moment, I'll never forget that moment. It was April 20th, 1986. And I knew on that day that I had to hide this. If I wanted to live and I wanted to move any further, I had to hide me. And so time really went on. I was in the service for about 10 years. And I met a lady. I ended up having 2 children. My son is 32 and my daughter's 31. They're both here in Nashville. Actually, my son moved to Clarksville. But they don't have anything to do with me. In fact, my entire family has basically most of them all have disowned me. There's a couple that still talk. I've got a distant cousin that found me through the DNA testing that we're really connecting. We're building a great relationship. But everybody else that I grew up with is they've all disowned me, and it kind of is what it is.
Well,
the one thing that I've learned about all of this is it seems to be really hard for people that know somebody to follow them through the transition. It's been very easy for me to meet new people and them to say, hey, it's okay. I understand who you are. I get that. I understand. But for people to know you before and after, it's really hard for them to make that transition. And a lot of people ask me, and it's kind of like going in a witness protection program, and you're starting all over fresh. And I don't know where I'm at with time. I know I'm kind of rambling, but I'm trying to learn. I'm learning to reinvent me. What is it I like? Because I know society said I was supposed to like this as a guy, and I was supposed to do this as a boy, and now I'm trying to. Basically, what I've done is I put everything on the table, and I'm trying everything to see what it is I like and what it is I don't like. After I got out of the service, I started at Vanderbilt working in the power plant. I've been there a little over 25 years. It's the same thing that I did in the service. I started out as a diesel mechanic, running diesel generators, and then I went to Chicago for 2 years to be a jet engine mechanic for gas turbines to turn gas turbine generators. And then I started at Vanderbilt and started my way at the bottom, shoveling coal, burning coal in the steam plant, and worked my way all the way up to lead supervisor there. In the process of all this, I've learned that as a privileged person, that not everybody gets to have what I have. And so I started a foundation called Finally Me. And it started as a surgery grant to help people that can't afford to pay their way. But as I've learned, there's so much more that needs to be done in education and to help people, and not just before the journey, but after, because it's something that nobody really talks about. And nobody talks about the male privilege that I didn't know I had, that I lost. Nobody talks about the male privilege that trans men gain that most of them don't want. Nobody talks about having to learn to let go of male pride, that it's okay to ask for directions. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I'm scared. And so it's been a big learning process. And so I want to share that with as many people as possible so that they don't get lost. And that's kind of why I do this, as education, because with the way the suicide rate is, it's just scary. It's 10 times higher than the suicide rate of everyone else. And there's no reason it should be that way.
Thank you so much for sharing the story that you've shared with us. I want to come back and ask you some follow-up questions and dig a little deeper in some areas, but I want to have Jace introduce himself and talk about his journey. And then I think we can, ask both of you some questions once we start to educate ourselves on terms and different things as we talk about transgender issues. So Jace, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I kind of had a similar experience to Olivia, especially at a young age, where I kind of had this idea in my head where I didn't perceive gender, almost, where I didn't see myself as a guy or a girl whenever I was very young. And so it was very strange to me when people would say I was female, or that I had to act like a certain way or be a certain way, because I was like, that doesn't make sense. It didn't register in my head. And it seemed like it registered for everyone else, though. So eventually, I kind of learned to go along with those things. And I did grow up liking both stereotypically feminine and stereotypically masculine things. And I remember having this conversation with my mom where she was like, I just thought you were strange because you just didn't have a preference either way. And I was just like, well, here I am. Then I started getting a little bit older, and kind of that perception started to kind of hit both on a societal standpoint and a personal standpoint. And I started realizing that something was off and something was wrong, but I didn't have the language for it. And I was also dealing with other things in my life at the time. So it was kind of like put it off. And then I get to being probably around 12 or 13. And it's just one of those things where it's like, I couldn't handle it anymore. Where I was at that point, I started struggling with self-harm and eating disorders, and I was doing all the wrong things and trying to put this off, but it obviously doesn't work that way. So eventually I come across this term transgender and I go into full denial. I was like, nah, that can't be it. It can't possibly be it. So I identified as lesbian because I was like, there's plenty of lesbian individuals that can present themselves masculinely, and that's probably just what's going on. So I remember I got a girlfriend, and it was my freshman year of high school. And I remember we even had a discussion where she told me, she was like, I don't think that you're gay. I think that's something else going on. I was like, nah, it's fine. Eventually I did, probably about a year later when I was about 13, going on 14, I started to accept it. And obviously being young and growing up in a rural area in Tennessee, that wasn't the most wonderful thing to kind of find out, was that, you're part of this identity, you're part of this group where it's going to make your life even harder. So I was one of the first people out in my school to really be open and out. So when I was about 14, I started trying to tell people what my name was. I tried to tell my family. At the time, I went by Jamie. So I came out as Jamie. And it's like this whole thing where I was like, oh, this is going to be so exciting because, the internet has all these coming out tips where like you can make a cake and stuff like that. So I made a colorful letter. And I remember the very next day, my mom sat me down and was just like, you don't want to be trans. And I was very confused. I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, you don't want to be trans. Do you want to be killed? And I was like, no, I don't want to be killed. She's like, then don't be trans. And that was the conversation. That was the end of the discussion. And I didn't bring it up for about a year. But at that point, once the seed is planted of knowing who you are, it doesn't stop growing just because someone else is trying to stunt it. You continue and you still see yourself now in that image. And so knowing who I was at that point, there was no turning back. So I cut off my hair in the bathroom. It was like very dramatic, obviously, but I had waist long hair and I cut it off in the bathroom. And I remember I tried to hide it for about 2 weeks. And of course, some of my friends were excited, but some of their families had opinions, but they didn't know why I cut my hair. They just, were like, oh, you cut your hair. That's awful. And my mom found out about 2 weeks later, and she kind of, I think, realized that there was no turning back from this. And there was a few weeks where she wouldn't allow me back in the household. And so I lived with friends for a little while, and none of their families knew why. I just kind of was like couch surfing, and none of them knew why. And I don't think that they wanted to ask, because I think that they knew they wouldn't like the answer. So, so from there on, I started being more open about it and started coming out more. And I had a lot of friends, families start telling me that I wasn't allowed back in their house, that I couldn't come back over. And that became difficult for me because I was also going through another period in my life where I was living with my mom, and she is a single mother who has health issues. So she couldn't take care of me properly all the time. So she needed that extra support. But because they found this out, they no longer were welcoming. They wouldn't allow me back in. So throughout high school, those things got difficult. And then you got the politics of being trans that got added on top of that. So suddenly the most kind of notable experience in high school that I had, that I've told Joe about before, was the experience where we tried to start a gay straight alliance in my school. And it was with this amazing trans kid who came from New York, and he was just trying to start a community. And at the same time, the Confederate flags were being banned on public grounds, like in schools and such. So some of the kids said, well, if they can have their flags, why can't we? And so we had these posters that had like rainbow flags and trans flags that we had to put up in the school. They tore them all down and went out to the parking lot while wearing these Confederate flags or having them with them, and burned them in the parking lot. And they tried to like come into the GSA meeting. And I remember, I think I only went to 2 because of that. And it was one of those experiences where I kind of realized in that moment that my identity was going to be politicized for the rest of my life. And there's plenty of experiences outside of that as well. And then I get to college, and this is like the first time I realized that I have a choice where either I can decide to live my life or I can decide to end it, basically, where I had that decision moment of just like, I can't take this anymore. And so I luckily made the decision and was able to make the decision when I moved to Belmont's campus to start coming out. And so I started telling professors for the first time my name, my pronouns, and eventually I fully came out, started hormones, and there's been difficulties while I've been in college as well, but it was obviously a lot nicer than living in the small town. And that's where I met Joe and my professor who introduced me to him. And I've gotten involved in activism and in that realm in which I see my identity as a form of empowerment, not as a form of a way to keep me down instead. So here we are.
Thank you both so much for sharing your story, for sharing your personal story, because this what you just did is the first step of education. It's coming out, it's living and being your true authentic self, and then sharing that story with others that educates them to what you have gone through and starts the dialogue to better understand it and then to be an advocate for it. And I just really thank you and appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story. I have questions about your story that I think we can work into some larger discussion and some larger education. One of the things I think we should start with is just some transgender terminology. That is often where we start around this issue. Today, the Chamber put out again our Transgender Terminology Guide. This is something that we came up with around Transgender Day of Remembrance, which we just honored and celebrated a couple. We don't celebrate it, we honor the victims and make sure it's celebrated in the way that we make sure it's known. But we put this out there, and so it's just some simple things to start off the conversation. She is transgender is the correct thing to say. She is a transgender is not correct. She is transgendered, which is the one that you hear, I feel, more than any others. They say transgendered. And I have to admit, several years ago, I mistakenly used that term. And I remember how I was called out in a room full of friends and people that were all doing the same type of mission and work, but was kind of made to feel ridiculed and embarrassed by it. And I've never made the mistake again, but I also, at that point, realized the importance of using the correct terminology, but also realized the importance of how we correct others when they do mess up, especially if it's unintentional, and how you can correct and educate people. And I really do appreciate both of you for how you educate. I bring that up now because we're going to get more into that, but that's the mistake that I have to admit that I've made, that I made years ago as I was still learning, and I continue to learn on a lot of things. So he transitioned a few years ago. He transgendered a few years ago. She transitioned. She changed genders. She changed genders is not correct. And y'all jump in on any explanation or more on any of these if you feel like it. When he presented as female / a woman / a girl before he transitioned, versus the incorrect when he was a girl before he became a boy. Now this one is interesting. The importance there is when he presented as female or before he transitioned. That is correct. Can do either one of you want to explain why that is correct and the other one is not?
Yeah, I can, if that's okay. Yeah, so I think one of the primary reasons that saying like when he presented as is also like, or before he transitioned is correct, is first off, you're acknowledging their actual gender throughout the entire process. So whenever you're saying he presented as, you're saying that that person, you know, we acknowledge that they never were a woman, a girl, female, that they were always them or him, and that they were really just presenting as that, or before he transitioned is just, you know, still acknowledging that he is him without kind of like backtracking the language, because by saying like when he was a girl, you're kind of decimating his identity a little bit, breaking it down and not really respecting it. Or when he became a boy, because he didn't become one, he was always a boy. You know, he just had to transition in order to get there, or he had presented at some point as a woman, and then now is been able to be seen by society as who he is.
Yeah, and that seems to be the biggest thing, is people think that we changed or we decided this, especially people in my age, you know, later in life, and we didn't. We've always had this. We've always been this way. It just took me a long time to be brave enough to let everybody see the real me, you know. But me, it's always been.
Yeah, that's the important one there. The one above, she transitioned versus she changed genders. You were always the gender you identify as now, and
Yes.
you transitioned to that gender from how you identified before.
Correct.
Is that correct? That's
yeah. And the way a lot of people say gender reassignment surgery, and I don't, I just call it my corrective surgery, because I didn't reassign anything. I just corrected a few things that, you know, it's just like if somebody had a cleft palate or no ear and they put an ear on. I mean, they just fixed some things that were kind of incorrect with birth.
Yeah, that's a great one. We need to add that example, because that is the correct way and an incorrect way. I really like that one. So this next one is one that I do a lot of educating on in the role of the chamber when I go and talk about LGBT issues. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same. I always point over here in the Zoom world to my the logo of the chamber. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual are are sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is who you are attracted to. It's who you go to bed with. Gender identity is how you identify, what gender you identify as, or you may identify as non-binary. And those two things are very, very separate, but we are part of one community, an all too often marginalized community that we have been bound through history and persecution and ridicule and marginalization into one community. And we've got to stay together, and we've got to educate our lesbian, gay, bisexual siblings around transgender issues, because I hear far too often, that doesn't affect me. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't need to be worried about that. And we've got to speak out to that. I mean, it feels sometimes like we won marriage equality, and some gays and lesbians batted their hands and walked away and said, we got what we wanted. The struggle never ended. You know, after marriage equality, you could still be fired for being gay or lesbian. That just changed last year. But our trans siblings have always been left out and said, hold on, we'll get to you. We're going to get these other rights. And I think with a lot of things now, no longer. We are all one. We're all moving together, and no longer will our transgender family be left behind. So gender identity and sexual orientation. I want to touch on both of your stories on that. Let's finish this, and then I'd love to circle back to your stories, because I have questions there that I think will help educate on that topic. The other question, don't ask about surgeries, private parts, unless a person explicitly invites that conversation. The incorrect thing is to say, did you get the surgery? Any comments on any of those?
It's really nobody's business what's between anybody's pants. And a cisgender person would never walk up to another cisgender person and say, hey, you know, And so it's just inappropriate. It's just something you shouldn't do. It doesn't make me any more or any less who I say I am.
Great.
I think you really, if you have the urge to ask that question, I think you really need to think about, would you ask your mother the same question? Would you ask another stranger the same question? Even if someone is your friend, I would always, respect people's boundaries. At the end of the day, it's just, there's no reason for that.
Transgender is an adjective, not a verb or a noun. Inserting the article before or adding ed at the end is not only grammatically incorrect, but it also implies that something has happened to make transgender people the way they are, which is false. Transgender people don't change genders, they change presentation. They have always been themselves. Respect that. And Olivia, I think you hit on that point so well on the previous slide. Talking about transitioning. When he was a girl, before he became a boy, these imply that transgender people were once something that they truly never were to begin with. Though they may have presented as either, they have always been their true self, even if they didn't have language to explain it. When relevant, use assigned female, male at birth. Do you want to talk about those terms, any, or at this point at all?
I really like the terminology of saying assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth because it also goes back to kind of not only respecting the autonomy of that person and their journey with their identity, but also it's something that can be used for people in general. That's something that everyone can basically hear and not get too confused about. Because even though they might get struck by the idea of just like, oh, what do you mean assigned female birth? And it's like, well, they are this gender, but they were assigned this at birth, which was wrong. And so you're putting not the blame on the trans person for not identifying the exact same way, but rather a mistake that was made on a birth certificate.
I like that because that's not your decision. The doctor made that before you could make a decision. So I like that.
That is a wonderful point. Very good. All right, so to circle back to your stories and continuing this discussion, Olivia, first, thank you for your service to our country. And we are going to use this as a way to segue into some good news today. President Biden issued the first presidential proclamation on Trans Day of Visibility. He said, today we honor and celebrate the achievement and resiliency of transgender individuals and communities. What he did today was he rescinded the Trump administration's ban on transgender men and women, Americans serving in the military. A very good day for this country and for history. They said they've already started implementing new policies to protect trans people, such as the executive order he issued on the first day of his presidency to expand discrimination protections for LGBTQ people under federal law, such as Affordable Housing Act. He also mentioned the first openly transgender American to be confirmed by the United States Senate, Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health, and patriotic transgender service members who are once again able to proudly and openly serve their country. A good day, and thank you for your service and sharing that story of what it was like serving in the military for you. I want to ask, and this goes to this sexual orientation, gender identity question for both of you.
Okay.
You said that when you dated, Olivia, women, they thought you were gay.
Mm-hmm.
And did you think you were? I mean, Jace talks about his journey and then reading about transgender. Did you always know you were transgender? When did that you were when did that happen, where your realization?
I didn't truly understand that. I knew that I wasn't gay. I knew that I liked women, but in the 70s, men were very different. They were very manly and wore musk cologne and unbuttoned their shirt, big hairy, and I didn't follow all of that. And so back then there was two boxes. You were straight or you were gay. There was no transgender, there was no anything else. So that's kind of the box that I got put in. They thought it was strange because I always dated women, but that's who I've always been attracted to.
Yeah.
So
because your sexual orientation.
And that's one of the hardest things I've had to try to explain to people after I came out and transitioned. They're like, okay, so you were this and you dated women and now you still date women. So you're what, a lesbian now? And I'm like, I've always been this way. I didn't stop liking women.
No, but I think this gets to a really good point that when they have that confusion, they are still seeing you as you presented.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And trying to put your sexual orientation on that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
So what you want to tell them is, see me for me, who I have always been, and I'm a lesbian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Jace, for you on that journey, you had talked about, dating, thinking you were lesbian and dating a female. And now your sexual orientation to fit you, how has that evolved, or what has been that journey?
Yeah. So again, like when my first like coming out was coming out as really second, but like that coming out for sexuality wise was me coming out as lesbian, because again, the kind of same thing as Olivia was talking about with that box of just like, oh, if you have certain characteristics, you're going to follow into this sexuality, which we all know is wrong. You can't say that, oh, because you're feminine, you're going to be a gay man, or because you're masculine, you can be a lesbian. But again, that was kind of the choice that I thought I had. So I identify as bisexual, and after I probably got to like my junior year of high school, I realized that I was bisexual. So I have dated individuals who identify as men, women, non-binary individuals as well. And I've had the same kind of interactions as Olivia's had, where people get confused, where I'm currently dating a guy. And so people are always like, okay, so so it's straight but with extra moves? And I was like, no, that's not it. Like I am technically in this relationship, I am in a homosexual relationship with another man because I am also a man. So it's the fact is at the beginning of everything, it's like everyone has their gender and gender identity, and that determines from there your sexual orientation is based off of like, okay, me plus other person's gender identity equals maybe what the sexual orientation follows, or the whoever you're attracted to, that's that plus or add-on. So if it's me plus man or plus woman or plus non-binary person, that could put me into the B. But it starts off with gender identity, and then it's whoever, exactly what you said, whoever you go to bed with then gives that sexual orientation category.
Right. Very well put.
That's very well put. And so when I say, and I always share this when I'm trying to educate around transgender issues, I do not understand transgender issues because I am not transgender. I am a cisgender, white, gay man, with all the privilege that comes with that. And I have to own that and say that and be upfront about it as I talk about these issues. So cisgender, meaning I identify as the gender, that confuses some people. Cisgender, transgender. Mm-hmm. Gender is I identify as the gender I was born, correct?
So signed at birth, yeah. So that's where the signed at birth language comes back in. It's just like, so the doctor got it right. And we know that again for 99% of the time, that's the answer is that, I was born, if I was born male, then I would say that, I identify as male still, so therefore I'm cisgender because I was assigned male at birth, and that's still correct for me. And then again, for that 1% of the time though, that is not aligned. So someone like me, again, I would say I'm assigned female at birth and I identify as male. So that would make me transgender.
That's the importance of assigned at birth versus born.
Mm-hmm.
See, I'm always trying to learn.
Education.
That's helpful because when you put it in that context, yes, of course, you need to say assigned at birth because that's the label that you were given. Okay. See, education happening right here. So cisgender, transgender, gender nonconforming, that gets thrown out there a lot. And then gender non-binary. I was like, Jace, you just said it and it left me for a second. So
Yeah.
either of you want to take those?
Well, it's kind of like what we've kind of both talked about along the way is growing up, there was 2 boxes and I had to be straight or gay. And a lot of people think that there's only 2 boxes of male or female, and there are so many variations in between there that, there's somewhere in the middle, and then you lean more this way, you lean more that way, or some people are exactly in the middle and some people are all the way this way and all the way that way. It's just, there's no real right answer. People are who they say they are.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and with that as well, for people that identify as gender nonconforming, it may be that they still identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. They just don't want to, buy into like gender roles, stuff like that, and they feel more comfortable just expressing themselves in a multiplicity of how we express gender. Just with like non-binary, where it's an actual feeling of I really don't see myself as male or female. So again, for me, I lean more towards the masculine side, which is why I use he, him, and they, them. Is because I wouldn't say I'm 100%. I would want to only be seen 100% of the time as male. I like being seen as that gender, having that gender diversity kind of gap almost. And I also like to point out that it is hard for cisgender people to kind of imagine what that experience is like. So I understand kind of like the push away of being like, that doesn't make sense. That sounds like it's made up. But you have to think about the fact that trans individuals already have a unique experience of getting to see all sorts of sides of gender and experiencing that from birth differently than everyone else. So it makes sense for us to have a different experience than everyone else.
I just am so thankful and proud of both of you for coming on and educating and talking with us. Jace, especially you, my friend, who I have really leaned on and talked to a lot about this and has educated me, and we've had some good discussions. I just looked at the clock. I think we could go on all night, honestly. I just looked at the clock, and I don't want to miss talking about the attack on transgender individuals that we are seeing across this country, but unfortunately here in Tennessee at a level that's unprecedented. Transgender people are under attack here. Transgender people are under attack everywhere. Transgender people, in the latest Gallup poll, people think that LGBT people are 10% of the population. We're not. We're more around 4.5 to 5%. And of that, transgender individuals are around 10% of that. When you take it into the national population, 0.02% of the population is estimated to be transgender. But the way we are hearing these laws and these bills come forward, transgender people are everywhere, and this is some huge issue. But the thing of it is a small population that allows transgender individuals to be targeted the way they do. if you look at the gay and lesbian swing of history from Stonewall in '69 to marriage equality in 2015, that swing is huge and historic and mind-blowing in a way that gays and lesbians gained the rights that they did in that short amount of time. But it's because, in large part, gays and lesbians came out, told their story, showed their relationships, and then everybody knew Jim and Joe and Judy and Suzanne, and they're your neighbors, your children, your friends, and of course they have the right to marry, and gay and lesbians are great. We have not been able to educate and tell the stories of the amazing transgender individuals that are out there trying to live their life. And that's what we're doing here tonight, and that's what we've got to do more of. I think education is so important. You talk to these legislators that are discriminating and legislating against transgender people, they've never talked to a transgender individual. They have no idea of what a transgender individual is going through. So we set this up to talk about the legislation that's out there, and I would love to know what you all are feeling, what you all think of it, what it does. Share your story, because you've, again, bravely stepped up here to talk with us about what this legislation means and how it makes you feel.
Well, first, let's just call it what it is. It's just discrimination. That's all it is. It's nothing more than fear and discrimination, because they're not trying to say trans men can't play sports. They're only saying they're specifically about trans women playing sports, and the biggest reason is they don't accept us as women. That's all it boils down to, is they don't accept us as who we are. I remember when I started very young and I played football. Our sponsor was Channel 4, and we played over at Belmead Methodist Church in the thing, and there was one boy of color, person of color, that played on our team. And I remember that there was only 3 or 4 water bottles that would share, and all the boys would hand them around, and nobody would give him. It's like, I'm not giving it to him. He's different. He's somebody else. And I would always go up and get in line and get a bottle, because they would give it to me, and I would always take it over there and share it with him, and then take a drink and look at him like, hey, nothing's happening to me. It didn't rub off. I'm still alive. I'm still okay. And it was just 1969 that people of color were not allowed to play football in the state of Tennessee. In my lifetime, just not long ago. And now this is nothing more than, it's not really racism, but it's just discrimination in a different form. But it's the same thing. Sorry.
Don't apologize. That's exactly right. It's not racism because it doesn't deal with race. It's just blatant discrimination.
It definitely terrifies me, honestly, because obviously I openly identify now as being trans, and it's one of those things where a lot of people try to very nicely tell me, oh, well, you don't look trans, and it's usually because they've been introduced to me, never knew me beforehand, or whatever it is. But I've had plenty of experiences of, maybe I'm wearing my mask a little bit lower, and somehow that made me look just feminine enough to get misgendered, or get the confused look, or get asked to leave the bathroom, whatever it is. So those words don't comfort me, or I don't think any trans person, when somebody says, well, you'll be fine, you don't look trans, because it's not about that at the end of the day. What it's about is that, the identity itself, whether you're open, closeted, or somewhere in between, is being attacked, and you're being targeted by the people that are supposed to be representing you, that you elected, that you thought were there for you to help make this place better. But in reality, you just don't feel welcome in your own home, right? And I do have a lot of issues with some of it, because exactly what we were talking about, which is that there is not an understanding, there's not any education going on. And, I think that if they would sit down and talk to a transgender person, they would realize we're not as scary as they think we are. And I think that on top of it, it does play into an age-old sexism kind of practice as well, because a lot of this talks about our, for example, with the trans athlete bill, says our poor women are being attacked by these men in dresses. In reality, that's not true, first off. And second off, there are plenty of other issues to talk about in women's sports, like the underfunding or coaches that are sexually harassing their athletes and so much more. And with the HRT bill, they're talking about our poor little girls that are being forced to go on testosterone. Again, it goes back to that sexism factor, where they're still putting that gender divide in, just in a new, refreshed way. And like Olivia was touching on, they've kind of spotlighted trans women to attack them and kind of like patronize them as men and put them into this very adultified image. Even though we're talking about little girls, we're literally talking about middle school and high school girls in this situation. And then with trans men, they're either not talking about them at all and acting like trans men don't exist,
right?
Or they're treating them as infantized little girls as well, even though these are almost, possibly grown men who are trying to make the decision, before start transitioning for their safety, but are being told no because X, Y, and Z, And so it's a lot of kind of spotlighting on particular issues and then burying live on the other issues.
Which, when you talked to me about this, it took me aback because it's not something that I even realized. I focus on the broad discrimination of it, but you were able to see that nuance of the discrimination of transgender individuals, and that there is difference in that discrimination of who they are targeting. Just so well said, and a great thing to point out and highlight. What do you want to tell, as both of you who are out and open about this, and thank you again for educating around this. What do you want to tell trans people out there that may be watching in regards to this discrimination that transgender people are facing?
I can go.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So there's been kind of a quote in my head that if you know me for more than 5 minutes, you know that I have an obsession, oddly, with Alan Turing of all people. And one of the quotes that he has is, "The future is only a short distance ahead." And so I think for a lot of trans people, it's very hard, especially trans kids. It's very hard to imagine the future, especially when your own state is making you feel unwelcome. And so I just want to remind other trans people that the future is only a short distance ahead, and to stay there, because you can't make it, and that the law is that they're putting in now is not the end, and that it's not okay, and that you don't have to pretend it's okay, but there is a fight to put in, and that it's hard to be open, but also, quoting another person of, Harvey Milk, one of the very famous things that he did during one of his speeches was talking about breaking down those closet doors and breaking down every closet door across the nation. Everybody needed to come out, and you saw all these individuals come out, and you saw this sudden interest in trying to understand and trying to learn. And even in his death, there is an increase of straight allies that stood by him and respected what he had done and the identity that came with it. So I would still just say, I know what is being done is trying to keep you buried alive, no matter what side you're on of this, of being a trans woman, trans man, or non-binary individual. But I would still say, try and knock down that closet door and live your life, because the future is only a short distance ahead.
Yeah. I like to say something still on the same lines. I'd like to say that, in a lot of ways, we're all kind of the same. We're all trying to live our authentic self. It doesn't matter if you're trans, non-binary, or you're gay, you're lesbian, whatever. The only difference is the uniqueness that Jason and I have is we don't really get to hide that. As a gay man or as a lesbian woman, you get to walk down the street and you don't hold a flag that says you are gay or lesbian. You get to kind of mold your way into it, and and you have the opportunity to go home to family and pretend to be whatever so that you don't have the hard time. So if you see a trans person out in public, know that that's one of the bravest, most resilient people you will ever know. And if you really, truly want to compliment and really stand on the side of a trans person, just ask their story, because we've been hiding it for so long. And for you to stop and listen means more than anything in the world that any person can do.
That is a great statement and a great thing to do. I was going to say, what can somebody do, in your opinion, what can somebody do to be a good ally to a trans person? Olivia, is it that? Is it ask to tell their story, or if you have other? Because I think people really want to know,
Right.
what can you do right now? What do you recommend?
I definitely would agree with Olivia of just ask for that person's story, because I think that you can learn a lot by just even understanding what a person's going through. You know, I remember when I first shared my story with you, Joe, it was one of those things where it felt like a matter of respect, where I had never actually had somebody ask that question. That was the first time I had ever actually told my story about being trans. So it shows a matter of respect. It's a learning opportunity for the other person that's listening. And it just honors the identity that we know is being battered down right now. And it puts a light on it, a good light on it for once.
Absolutely. Because when you listen to that person, you get to learn a little bit about them, and you get to learn who they are, because each trans person is a little bit different, and some will share some things and some won't share some things. And you'll learn by listening to their story what they will share, what they won't.
What would you tell a trans individual? You know, we talked about hanging in there, and you know, the future is changing. Hang in there. What would you tell them though on educating, on talking about these issues? I think we touched on it earlier. I feel like all of us need to be more respectful in our conversations, and we've got to bring everybody along with us. And I think that's why I so appreciate how you all educate, by allowing people to ask questions, by allowing people to make dumb comments that hopefully they can learn from. But it's all about continuing that education and bringing people along with you, is how I tend to work, versus shaming. Any advice for trans individuals on the journey?
My thing is, it's really hard to hate somebody or something that you know. And so I spend a lot of my time just going around and introducing myself and telling people who I am, so they have an opportunity to meet somebody. And anybody that knows me, my name's Olivia Ruth Hill. You can look me up on Facebook, and I will answer any question you ever have at any time, day or night. Because to me, the more you all learn, the more you're going to stand on my side.
I agree with Olivia. And especially, I think that, especially for younger trans youth who are first coming out, it's normal to feel uncomfortable and normal to feel uncomfortable about educating. And it takes work. Respect your own boundaries and respect what you need, while also educating others. So respect that, maybe you do have limits, maybe that you can't always answer these questions, but know that nobody that truly respects you is trying to ask that out of disrespect for your humanity. And you can take that, if they are asking something that does degrade at, understand that it's probably not on purpose. It's a lack of education, just like you may have started not knowing that this identity existed, or that these were the ways to use pronouns. The best way to move the needle in any direction is to provide that education however you can and whenever you can, but also, again, respect your boundaries so that you don't snap, or that you don't take it the wrong way, because that's what happens. Sometimes you do hit a burnout wall, and that's okay. Take your time, learn, keep building up your progress, and just do what you can, and listen as well, because I think that's the other key component, is that sometimes we can hear someone say something and think that they meant something hostile, but in reality, they just really thought this was the correct way. So maybe ask them again, ask them further follow-up questions, and try and kind of lead them into a nicer area almost.
And one of the things I like to try to use is kind of non-invasive or whatever, but when somebody misgenders you and they continue to misgender you, and some woman continues to call me sir or things like that, then I just look at her and say, yes, sir. And a lot of times they're like, hey, I'm not a man. And I'm like, I'm not either.
Yeah, that works. It does.
Because if you just sit there and go, hey, and you argue with them, it just puts out hostile, and it makes them kind of angry, and then you put a wedge in between there. But if you just turn around on them and use the same thing to them that they are using to you, it's very effective.
Well, listen more and educate yourself more and move that needle. I hope that is what we have done here tonight. I just cannot thank you both enough for joining us on Transgender Day of Visibility and talking about this. We're doing everything we can here at the Nashville LGBT Chamber to stop these discriminatory bills. We want to make sure that everybody knows that everybody is welcome at this organization, and we will continue to fight for our trans siblings and the LGBT community. We didn't even touch on the marginalized of the marginalized. We didn't even touch on the higher than any suicide rate or murder rates out there on trans individuals. We need to continue this discussion and continue this education on transgender issues, and we are committed to it. Again, just thank you guys both so much for sharing your story today and joining us. We'll be doing this again real soon, lifting up transgender voices. And I really thank you again for doing this.
Can I just jump in there real quick, Joe, and say thank you to you for standing up for us and for giving us this opportunity to talk to everybody, and to every single person out there that's watching this. Thank you very much, because when you hear us, you share that with somebody else, and every person that shares it with somebody else. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch and listen to us.
Thank you both, Joe, and again, everyone that's also watching, and Olivia for being here with us. This matters a lot, because only a couple of years ago, you would have never even heard our voices. So this matters a lot. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you real soon. We appreciate you joining us. Good night.
Bye.